Welcome to Character in Action with Matthew J. Norcross, the official podcast of the 7 Degrees of Change Foundation. Come journey with us on the real-life stories of character in action. And now here's your host, Matthew J. Norcross.
Welcome to Character in Action from the 7 Degrees of Change Foundation. I'm Matthew J. Norcross here in the studio with Richard Shannon. Hey, Richard.
Hey, how are you?
Doing good. Now, we have a very special guest with us today, and I've known him for quite some time. His name is Kevin Spade, and he's an anesthesiologist in High Point, North Carolina. And he received his medical degree from Medical University of South Carolina College of Medicine and has been in practice for more than 20 years. Kevin joins us now over the phone. Kevin, thanks for being on Character in Action.
Thank you for having me, Matthew. I appreciate it.
All right. Now, before we get started, can you tell our listeners more about yourself?
Yes, I'd be happy to. My greatest accomplishments are the fact that I'm a husband and a father, and I have 3 wonderful kids and a wonderful wife. But in addition to that, I originally was born in South Carolina, and my family roots were in North Carolina. I went to undergraduate school at NC State and got an engineering degree as a preparation to go to medical school. I'd always wanted to do that. One of my mentors had taken me down that pathway. And then I got my medical schooling in Charleston, South Carolina, as you said, and residency training at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem.
That's very nice, isn't it, Richard?
I love it. I love family, and I definitely love education in the medical field. We appreciate you for that.
Now, how do you define character?
Oh, my. Well, character in my eyes is those intrinsic qualities about you that make you do what you do when no one else is watching. That is, it's the core of your ethics, what you perceive to be right and how you behave in situations that test those standard beliefs you hold.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. What say you, Rich?
Yeah, character is always so important. What Dr. Carson would always tell us is don't let your talent take you where your character can't keep you. It's always been a very important thing in my life to know.
Yeah, I agree with that. So please tell us the story of witnessing either in person or in history. Someone that was a true phoenix, someone that was a role model, leading by example and making the world a better place.
Well, in my view, historically, a person that fits into that mold very well is Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill went into the military as a war correspondent during the Boer War, which is where England was challenging the hegemony of the Dutch colonists in South Africa. After that, he became the Admiralty of the Navy, the Vice Admiral of the Navy for the British Navy, and was responsible for a very failed military campaign called the Campaign of Gallipoli, where the British losses were huge. It was a rout. Everything was terrible during that time, and he lost his position because of that. Kind of almost went into, I won't say hiding, but definitely out of the public spotlight after that. And then the lessons that he learned during those periods of time of observing war and being involved in war and having a terrible consequence made him the person that Britain needed to lead them during the Second World War. And so that, I think, is kind of like the very definition of a phoenix, somebody who burned down under circumstances and then rose from those ashes to be the person that needed to be in a different time, at a different place, for a different reason because of those lessons they'd learned before.
Wow.
Yeah.
I definitely want to go watch that Winston Churchill movie now.
Me too. So please share a moment that stands out in your mind, something big or even the slightest gesture that was a transformative Phoenix moment, one where you know you had significant impact on an individual's life or a group of people?
Well, Matt, that's a wonderful question, and sometimes you get to see those things, but other times you don't. I mean, I'll give you a concrete example. There's a man that I thought the world of, Michael McNamara, who was a physician in High Point, and Michael did some what seemed to be very small things. He was an excellent writer, and he understood the human condition very well. So when someone on the medical staff or somebody in the medical administration or a patient were ill, he would write them personal notes. And in those notes, he gave words of encouragement and was very much able to kind of empathize with your situation and give you encouragement at a time when you needed it. These notes were cherished by the people he gave them to, and it caused a great deal of change in their lives. Now, I don't know whether Dr. McNamara ever really realized that, but what it showed me is that the smallest of gestures can sometimes cause the biggest change in other people's lives. And I hope that I've done some of those things, but sometimes you don't know because you don't know what goes beyond you. So that's why I always feel it's critically important to give what you can, when you can, to all you can, because it can really make a difference, and you may never know that those things are going to make a difference when you're actually doing something for someone else.
Yeah, that's very important to think about, isn't it, Richard?
Yeah, I can already say that just talking to you before. I've talked to you before, just in our short time, you've already impacted me in a way, as far as the way I view the medical field and especially being in Winston-Salem, having such a great medical hospital, to have more of a person that relates to that I can see is a beautiful thing. So you've already made an impact on me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the trait of respect. How do you think we can rekindle the trait of respect today through your profession? And how does this trait relate to your job as a doctor and someone who's practicing medicine?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. Respect is very critical to forming a trust relationship with someone. Your life or your fortunes or your family in somebody else's hands, they have to know that you respect them in order to trust you. And without that trust, you can't accomplish what you need to, because you don't need to have them looking over their shoulder the whole time wondering about you. So that respect, you have to let people know that you care about their lives and their ambitions and their world in order for them to really form that trust bond with you, which, again, I said is absolutely critical when you're taking care of somebody's life.
Right.
And the clinicians taking care of them are seemingly interchangeable, and they may be sent from one clinician to another clinician within the same office even, or the same hospital. It kind of, they lose that idea that you have respect for them and their lives, and the trust can sometimes get broken down, and the whole healthcare thing becomes a little bit more difficult in order to get a good outcome. Does that help?
Yeah, that definitely helps. So another very important trait, and another great one, as I might add, is responsibility. Now, from your perspective as a daughter, what does responsibility mean to you?
Responsibility means to me doing what you say you will do. That is, you accept responsibility and you do everything you can to keep your word about the responsibility you've accepted. That is, you don't enter into responsibility relationships on a whim. And when you accept the responsibility for something, you're going to perform to the best of your ability. And that's really critical in having people, again, trust you, but responsibility is something that you have yourself or that you impose upon yourself. But over time, people start to recognize you as a person of your word. That is, you are a responsible person. And their trust in getting something done correctly when you said you'll do it becomes part of the image you form for other people, the way other people see you.
I concur with that. Don't you, Richard?
Yeah. I was wondering, when it comes to responsibility, when you have younger doctors are coming up behind you, is there a way that you all find out the type of how they look at responsibility, or is it kind of you just look at their resumes, or is there a certain thing that you pick up on? Like, how do you find that in the doctors coming under y'all?
The responsibility facet of somebody's character is that, if they tell you that they're going to accomplish something or do something or be there for something and they're not, it kind of gives you an idea that they're not a responsible provider. If they tell you and they always overperform, then you know that they are accepting the responsibility of that task. They're accepting the responsibility of that patient. They're accepting the responsibility of that outcome. And again, it tells you who they are and that you can trust when they say something will be done, that it will be done well, it will be done timely, and it will be done completely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Does that ever put maybe like a strain in, I guess, patience? So not patience like the people, but patience in the sense of, I guess that's something you have to spend some time watching and waiting on.
Very early about whether somebody is going to be responsible or not, but yeah, it does take a little bit of time. Not usually too much. People who are irresponsible don't perform.
Right.
They don't accept personal. They don't accept personally the need in order to accomplish what they've told you they will. So that's an irresponsible person.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you. Now, let's move on to fairness, because this is another great trait of mine and another one of my personal favorites. How would you define fairness, and how would you want people to demonstrate this trait in both their professional and their personal lives, especially in the field of medicine?
Well, fairness I see is equal treatment. That is, you don't treat one person one way and then treat someone differently. It's a very important part of ethics of things. I mean, you don't treat somebody differently because, one, they don't look like you. You don't treat them differently because they don't have the same belief system you do. You treat them as you would want to be treated. And that is the critical element of this. I mean, if you always treat somebody as you would want to be treated, you by definition want to be treated fairly, and you will therefore treat people fairly. And it seems very easy to do, but we see unequal treatment all the time. And current, I won't label your show, but current events are showing unequal treatment with respect to the law all the time. And it's a hot button social topic right now. Can you be assured of being treated equally by law enforcement? Can you be treated equally by the Justice Department? The Lady Justice has a blindfold on because it shouldn't make any difference who is showing up in the Department of Justice, in the court system, and the same thing should be true everywhere. I mean, you should be treated equally to be fair about things in all walks of life. Medical care is that also.
Yep.
You're good.
Yeah, so, that's a good way to put it. Now, let's move on to trustworthiness. Now, being in the medical field heavily relies on this trait. And my question to you is, how do you expect to earn your trust among your patients?
Well, I think we've touched on that a little bit.
Right.
They have to feel like you are interested in their best outcome, not your best outcome, not the system's best outcome, not even society's best outcome. And that's a big part of the Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath ties the physician relationship with the patient to the patient, ignoring all other factors, that you are a proponent of the patient's best interest. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Once you've established that with the patient, that you are their advocate, then the trust comes very quickly, as long as you do the other things we talked about, particularly like you act responsibly. That is, you say you're going to do things and you accomplish those goals, then the trust bond forms very quickly.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. So, this is something to take in. Now, let's move on to caring, because this is another important aspect, especially in your business. Now, a guy named Joel Red was a previous guest of mine, and I worked with him on what was now known as Disney's Hollywood Studios at Walt Disney World. And the goal of a Disney employee or cast member is to take care of their guests. But what I want to know is, what does caring mean to you as a doctor?
Caring to me can't be divorced from empathy.
Right.
You have to be empathetic and aware of what's going on in somebody else's life to be caring. You have to be observant. You have to understand the situation that they're dealing with, and you also have to be empathetic. What would I feel like put in their position? And once you've done that, then you either choose to be caring or you choose to be non-caring. And if you choose to be non-caring, then you don't develop a trust relationship with that individual, because they can understand that you understand their situation, but at the same time, you haven't done anything in order to affect a change. You haven't shown that you really feel their pain or their suffering, and you are therefore, by definition, uncaring about their situation.
Yeah, so it's definitely something to think about. That's for sure. It's very hard to take in, but you really have to learn about what caring is. You know.
Does that help, having the nurses and them being in, I guess, more frequently? Do they help give you reports and in some sense instantly give you the empathy when you walk in, or is it just I automatically have this empathy, this caring spirit, this everything for this person before I even walk in the building?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Now, the nursing staff and all the staff that interacts with the patient, that reports information to you, helps with developing the whole situational awareness of what this person is going through. But it's usually the face-to-face interaction with the patient that gives an individual practitioner the chance to develop empathy for that person. You may have empathy for their situation. What would I do in that situation? But you don't have empathy for them until you actually are presented with them as an individual. That kind of makes sense?
Yes, that makes 100% sense.
Yeah.
It's just because there was always, I grew up in a house, in a family full of nurses, and, they would always say, well, the doctor just kind of comes in and he looks at the information and he goes. And so hearing you as the doctor speak gives me a whole nother perspective, in the sense, because I know a lot of people think like that. There's, the doctor's just there to kind of solve the problem and do whatever. But just like the nurse, just like any person that's walking in those facilities, especially the great ones we have here, everyone's an advocate for this person's health. And these traits right here, and even hearing how you talk about these traits, just make me even more happy and feel blessed to know that we have physicians like you that make, High Point, Winston, just the whole health system good.
Well, the nursing staff historically have had more time to spend with patients than physicians have. Physicians have been divided up to taking care of multiple patients, and nurses maybe a fewer number of patients, so they could develop more of a understanding at the bedside of what this person was going through and social problems and all that kind of stuff. It's not that the physicians are divorced from that, but yeah, what you described as the nurses having an empathetic touch and that being a very important part of nursing is definitely true. But it's not lost on physicians. And it differs. It differs from the hospital where an intensivist may be taking care of a bunch of very sick patients all at one time, and he has to divide his time up, or she has to divide her time up, versus a family practice like one of my closest friends, one of my classmates from high school is a family physician. And because he gets presented with the same people time after time after time over years and years, there's no nurse in his practice that knows his patients as well as he does. So it's kind of situational. But your point's well made about the nurses at the bedside in the hospital versus a clinical practice where my friend has seen the same patient for 30 years and maybe have delivered their child and taken care of their husband when they were sick. It's a whole different thing, but it's still that personal interaction that makes a big difference.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
Yeah, it is. Now, you were mentioning empathy, and that's another question I'm actually going to ask you. What does empathy mean to you as a medical professional?
Empathy to me means putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. And I don't mean just, the problem they have right now in front of them, but also all of the other factors that come into how they process that problem. You're not really empathetic until you have submerged yourself into their life situation, including the problem that's at hand. But not only that problem that's at hand, but their educational background, their financial resources or other resources, their extended family. And once you've buried yourself in all of that, then you can truly begin to understand how what they're facing is impacting them right now. I think one of the metaphors for that was an old Indian saying, "Don't judge a man until you walk the mile in his shoes." And that's, again, the whole concept of empathy. Don't judge somebody's problem. Don't judge their reaction to that problem until you have immersed yourself into their life situation so you can really understand how it impacts them and how devastating it might be in their situation.
Awesome. I have a question.
Sure.
And it doesn't have to, especially for you, it doesn't have to immediately mean you're speaking for your company or your superiors. But the more that I'm hearing you talk about the things that y'all are assessing on top of the physical or whatever problems that there are, to me, it seems like there needs to be some empathy for you as the physician, from maybe leadership and things like that, so y'all would be able to decompress and actually go home and not take all that with you. Is there a process or some type of system to allow you all to do that? Because that sounds like a lot that you have to mentally take on top of the job.
Yeah, I mean, the burnout, clinician burnout, physician burnout, nursing staff burnout, taking on those kinds of problems of other people and immersing yourself in those problems is something that can lead to you being fatigued. And actually, sometimes people even call it emotional fatigue. You get to the point where it's so painful to feel other people's situations that you kind of start isolating yourself from them. And then it changes the way you interact with people, and that can be bad. Is that the responsibility of the higher-ups on the chain? Perhaps so, but there's a lot of resources that people develop over time on in ways to prevent themselves from getting that way. Sometimes it's taking less work or less of a workload. That's always been a problem. And one of the problems we have right now, it seems as if physician and clinician burnout is higher, and a lot of it, I think, has to do with the speed with which the system wants us to process patients. And again, looking at clinicians or physicians as interchangeable. So say you're going to a medical practice and you never see the same person. Say you don't have somebody like my friend that I was describing that that had been in practice for 30 years with the same patients the entire time, but you're seeing somebody different every time. It's hard for that person that you're seeing that's different every time in a practice to empathize with you. They don't know you.
Right.
It's impossible for them to get to know you in 20 minutes, the way that somebody who's been taking care of your family for 30 years knows you. And when you walk in, you don't have to go through your life history because they know your life history.
Mm.
And you can get to the problem, and they don't have to go through generating that understanding about everything else that's going on with you. So again, I think as we corporatize medicine and we get away from a clinician seeing the same family members year over year over year, and people come and go in the medical practice, and different practitioners come in and move out, and you see different people every time you go to the office, that adds to a couple of problems. One, the patients don't feel valued because does anybody really know your name, or are you a medical record number? And as far as the clinicians go, it adds to that. Do I want to take on another person's whole set of social problems and all that kind of stuff, or do I just want to take care of what they came in here for today and leave the rest of it behind in order to keep from burning out emotionally? Yeah. So our system, unfortunately, is going to higher output situations where there's less continuity, and I think that adds to the burnout. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now, before we close, please share with us some thoughts on how we can bring character back into our culture.
Ooh, character back into the culture. Well, that's a very great question, Matthew. I was actually talking with a woman not too long ago who came into me, and she started talking about the problem of the day. And it happened to be about a conflict, a war conflict that was going on. And she specifically mentioned how horrible it was that such and such was the problem. And I'm going like, well, why do you think such and such is the problem? I said, I know that's the kind of narrative that's going on, but how did you make that judgment? Because that's a judgment that requires an ethical decision. You're branding one side of this conflict as being good and the other side is evil. How did you make that judgment? What do you use as your ethical framework? So the way we can only establish character, in my opinion, we have to understand what ethical framework we're coming from. Because if we're not acting ethically, character loses its meaning. I mean, you have to have you base right and wrong, good and evil, because if you don't, character has no function at all. Because we say, or when we think of people with character, we're thinking of people who do the right thing for the right reasons, no matter if anybody's looking or not, because it's about what's inside of them, not what their perception they're trying to create on the outside for other people to see. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's a great way to end the show. Kevin Spate, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome, Matthew. Thank you for having me on.
Yep. And thank you, Richard, for your help.
My pleasure.
Goodbye, Richard.
See ya.
See you. Character in Action is a production of the 7 Degrees of Change Foundation and the Truth Network. Your host is me, Matthew J. Norcross. Our producers are Robbie Dillmore and Richard Chen. If you like the show, please listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts throughout every Sunday morning. Thank you for listening, and always remember, everyone can be a phoenix.